Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And very special guest and friend and colleague and coworker and peer, Christine Fox Parker. Christine, hello.
Hello, glad to be here.
Glad to have you here.
Yes, we are very happy to have you here.
So most of you listeners might know Christine. If you don't know her, or if you don't recognize the name, you will probably recognize the ministry, Porch Swing Ministries. Christine, maybe give us a little bit of a background on that. I'm a board member over at Porch Swing and really love what you do. And maybe just tell people all about your ministry and how it got started.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, we started in 2018 to fill a need that had been rising over the course of 3 previous years for survivors to have other survivors to walk alongside them, survivors of church abuse, all forms of church abuse, who could walk alongside other survivors of church abuse. So the concept was survivor to survivor care. We provide caring conversations from one survivor who's a little further down the road in their healing to survivors who might be still going through their crisis or their disclosure crisis. As we often, we all know as advocates that the disclosure of church abuse to family members, to church leaders, to others is often a re-traumatization. We don't tend to handle disclosures of church abuse very well, and that results in survivors being re-victimized. So that's what we do. That's our primary vision, is caring for survivors of church abuse in a caring and kind and loving, sacred space sort of way. We also, I'm very excited about some additions to what we're doing more recently. We've started a pilot program for providing yoga to a trauma-informed yoga to survivors through Zoom. So be watching for more information about that. And we have, when we started, it was me and my board of trustees, and Jimmy's been on that board since its beginning, and I appreciate that beyond measure. We've also, I just got stuck. I forgot where I was going with that, so I'm just going to go somewhere else. We added another board member a year and a half ago, Lichelle Moore, and she also does survivor to survivor care. She helps write the blog, and we've had some guest bloggers over the years. So just kind of growing a little bit and providing training. I do a lot of one-on-one consultations with ministers around the country when they've had a disclosure come into their circle, and helping them walk through that in a safe and kind and loving way.
Awesome.
And let me just say, I'm coming to you today. I'm very happy to be sitting on my porch swing. We named Porch Swing Ministries because my front porch has always been my safe haven, and we wanted to be a safe haven for survivors of church abuse. And I had never actually owned a porch swing on any of my porches before, but my husband of now 2 years bought this porch swing for me for our anniversary this year.
I love that.
Yeah,
you look perfect sitting on that porch swing. Yeah. Perfect.
Very, very cool.
Yes.
So today, Christine and I and you.
And me.
Well, I
And Brandon.
gotta like put you on the back burner.
I love that. I love that.
She's only half of the podcast, you know.
And you. Okay.
And me.
Yeah, well,
You
Jimmy
only
told me
made
the podcast because Clara had Jimmy. So
yeah, she only made me.
Yes.
So
That's a kid for you.
so we are all going to talk about a very important topic, especially as it relates to abuse, and that is leadership abuse, recognizing abusive leaders within the church. This one is very close to my heart. Christine, I know it is yours too. We routinely hear from survivors who not only endured their abuse from their abuser, but then went on to be abused, whether it was spiritual abuse, verbal abuse, what have you, by what's that?
psychological abuse.
Yeah, psychological abuse,
yeah.
Even sexual abuse
Mhm.
by spiritual leaders. So you and I collaborated on a trusty dusty document here, which we will link to the podcast. That was kind of a work in progress for a period of several months. And I think it's pretty solid for how to recognize abusive leaders. It's just called Traits of Abusive Leaders. And yeah, so we're going to talk about that today and how people can recognize
Well,
abusers.
Jimmy and Christine, this is, I think, quite an extensive list. It's really
Mhm.
great. I mean, when I read through this, I see so many things that jump out, and it's like, wow, I didn't think of abuse in this way. I didn't realize this is what you would call it. How did the two of you develop this list of traits? How did that come about? Christine's smiling.
Take it away, Christine, because I don't even really know if yeah, I don't even really know if I know we just
I know. I remember clearly.
yeah, I think as with anything, it you know, you do things because it's close and personal to you.
Mhm.
You know, it's not like you're like, I'm just going to sit down and boringly spend hours upon hours thinking about abusive leaders and how you
I
recognize.
didn't think you
right?
did it that way.
It's
I didn't think.
experiences with these heartbreaking issues that causes us to delve deeper into understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as background to this, Jimmy and I have been friends since before either one of us knew that there was abuse in our families.
Okay.
So we've been friends back since our own graduate school days. And more than 10 years it's been now. My discovery of the abuse that I was experiencing in my family from a ministry leader was, oh gosh, I think it's been 7 years now. And for Jimmy, it's been 10, 11. And so, but we've been friends since before
Right.
that. Okay. Yeah. And so when our stories started coming out, we were aware of each other's stories coming out, and we're in different ways walking through that with each other at different points in time. And so several years after what happened in your family with your father and Clara with your husband was well known, and John was already in prison. Jimmy posted a list of what he called traits of abusive leaders in a group that we're both in on Facebook of several hundred ministers, and said, this is what I see when I look at abusive leaders, but he was looking for some crowdsourcing. And this was at least a year after I had discovered what was happening in my family. And so I looked at it, and I don't know if you tagged people or I think you just put it out.
I think I just put it in the group.
And I looked at the list, and it was probably 10 or 15 traits long. And I just started adding to it. I mean, my brain just went into immediately thinking about the things that I had seen, not only in the life of my abuser and that relationship, but also the the other leaders around me who handled it very poorly, some of whom I'm certain did so unwittingly and did not want to do harm or damage, but didn't know any better. But others who I'm certain to this day were arrogant and abusive themselves, and were using their power to do that. So it wasn't a couple of days before we had 25 traits that we worked out. And not just traits, but what that looks like. And so on this list, there's what that looks like. And we both kind of went, and there were others who had thrown in a couple of other really good ones that we added to the list. And so then we kind of looked at that and went, wow, we really, this is important, because if we know the traits of abusers, then we can see them. What this pointed to us was that Jimmy and I knew how to see abusers.
Right.
Like, we know how to identify an abuser, and we've both been able to, in each other's presence, say, oh, wow, that guy is an abuser. You need to get away from that person. Or, oh, wow, that person is an abusive leader. You need to move away from that person. So it was kind of playing out in our friendship and in our professional lives, that not only could we list on a piece of paper the traits of abusers, but we were intuitively experiencing the knowledge that we could see this. So we kind of got busy with life. Kids, Jimmy had little kids, and they're less little now, but they're still little at home. And I had a teenage son in high school at home, and both of us working full time and supporting families. So we kind of got busy and didn't get back to it until a year or so ago. I had something come up I wanted to use it for, so I went back to it and just really updated the language, just kind of clarifying the language and making it sound like human beings wrote it.
Right. Yeah.
It was a little jumbly when we first wrote it, because we were just kind of writing from our own experiences. And this is the final list that we've gotten to. And the last thing I'll say about this is this particular document is there are a lot of really great books out there now that didn't exist 6 or 7 10 years ago about abuse in churches, about abusive leaders. So Chuck DeGroat, When Narcissism Comes to Church, wonderful, wonderful book. And he's got 2 lists. One's a list of 6 traits of abusive leaders, and one is a list of 9. I'm not sure why he does it that way, but that's okay. His list aligns with these. There are others. I can't remember. I had another one in mind this morning that had traits of abusive leaders in it, but I can't think of it right now. What I think ours does is gets more specific.
It is, yeah.
The Scott McKnight and Barrington, I think is her last name, just wrote a church called Tove.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, but everybody raves about it.
Yeah. They do a great job of describing a toxic church and toxic leadership. And again, their list isn't as long, but these traits really, I think, just flesh out more, put skin on the skeletons of their list as well.
I'll say it again. Thank you both so much for resources like this that we now have. 10 years ago, Jimmy, we had nothing when you think about it. And now with a resource like this, it's incredibly helpful, which brings me to the next question, though. As I read through these descriptive traits of abusive leaders, it's obvious that sometimes people, including myself, we have some of these traits in our own lives. So how do you, and here my allergies are tickling my throat, sorry, how do you know what is abuse and what isn't abuse? Either one of you or both of you.
Well, I want to preface this by saying Tom Rainer, who writes all things
church growth and church decline. Writes a lot of really good books. He talks about, I forget which book it is. I think it's Anatomy of a Revived Church. It's like one of his most recent books, but he talks about how all it takes is one abusive person in a church to literally undo every ministry, pull the wind out of every person's sail, just give the spirit of defeat and decline and that awful anxiety, panic attack kind of ridden church where he says it's just one person. And he said a lot of people in ministry feel like there are all these problematic people in the church because there are problematic people, right? But he said in his experience consulting with churches, in thousands of them, he said very rarely will you find, even in really large churches, very rarely will you find more than one person who is the root of the problem. And I thought that was really affirming for some of the stuff that we talked about too, because usually other people kind of, the abuser will triangulate and get other people on their side and talk behind people's backs. And they're campaigning in a sense to really tear down other people and in order to build themselves up because they're narcissists,
and
right?
It's a very crafty way that they go about doing it.
Is.
The normal person will not recognize that. You go into a congregation and you're there for a purpose of worshiping, lifting each other up. And you get this toxic taste right away. And you don't know why, we don't know why, but I like that it can be traced back like that. The Bible affirms that by saying what? It's like a little leaven leavens the whole loaf. And we use a term, a rotten apple will spoil the whole, bunch of apples,
right?
Which we know is true. It doesn't take long for that to happen.
So I think if you take any one of these, say corrective theology, right? That's just, I'd put a random one. So corrective theology, they use meetings or written messages to correct things that were said by others. And sometimes we do that, sometimes we need to do corrective theology. But for me, where you cross that bridge and you move from somebody who might just be annoying or as a know-it-all, like when it relates to church, I think of that annoying kid in the Polar Express that always has to be right. Hey, you don't have a ticket. He doesn't have a ticket. He doesn't have a ticket. Right. That annoying kid who always has to have the last word, always has to be right. They're just always up in people's faces. Some people are just really annoying. Christine, you and I have talked about this, and we'll be very blunt for the sake of the podcast. Church people are weird. I mean, go into Walmart, like they have those videos, the people of Walmart. They ought to do reels on Instagram, people of church, right? Like church people are just weird. And I'm saying that as a church leader. I love the church to death, but some people are just really, really weird. They act weird. They get weird when they go to church. They don't act like that when they're out in the supermarket.
I just have been hearing so much on K-Love about this very thing. I listen to it driving to and from work, and it's like, why is it that we put on a whole different facade when we enter the church building?
I don't know. I don't know. That's the question of the century. People get weird.
Yeah.
But that aside, there's a difference between being weird, being annoying, getting in people's faces, having to prove that you're right. Like that's a human trait of a lot of people. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily make somebody an abuser. For me, where we cross into that area of being abusive is somebody who always has to correct people and belittle them in the process. They move beyond correcting somebody because they think it's the right thing to do to now they're on a mission and they're going to find other people. It's not just one person. Right. They don't target one person. They start, you start seeing these undeniable patterns where they're so concrete that that person is always tagging people, tapping them on the shoulder. Hey, we need to talk, intimidation. And so we have all these different traits, but Christine, I'll let you expand on that. But for me, that's where you cross into abusive is when there's that persistence
they're
to carry these things out.
They're lining up their little army. Yeah.
And when it comes to the corrective theology piece, what an abusive leader is doing is correcting everybody's theology so that it molds and shapes everybody's theology into the leader's theology.
Yes.
So they are creating a sort of a Stepford Wives version of church.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody falls in line, and anybody who falls outside of that is either corrected and brought back into line, or with other traits that are on this list will be ostracized by the whole group. So yes. They're working to bring groupthink into their theology. So it's not just about, I know better, I know more than you do, and I'm going to show it off. It's right. Very purposeful, the corrective theology piece is. One of the other things that I think differentiates between, I do some of these things some of the time, and people who actually have these traits as abusive leaders is, there's several things that I think could be touched on here. One of the things that I talk about is intensity and distress. We all do some of these things. We all do multiple things.
We do. Can see several things that I do on occasion.
For instance,
absolutely.
There is, I was looking for, absence of conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
There are some times when I just don't want to deal with a conflict, and I want to walk away from it. And sometimes I actually do that. Mm-hmm. For an abuser, they will never resolve conflict. What they will do is manipulate conflict.
Yes.
They will manage conflict. They'll even stir up conflict so they can manage and manipulate it. So it's a matter of intensity. They're always going to avoid conflict management, and therefore it causes distress. So intensity and distress. Does my avoidance of conflict from time to time cause distress? Yes. But for the most part, and people will tell you this in my life, I don't avoid conflict. In fact, sometimes they say I like to fight, which is not a true statement. I just am not afraid of dealing with conflict when it comes up, because it's easier to deal with it in the moment than put it off and deal with the consequences of it later. Another one, I love this one. I can't find it on the list, but, and maybe it falls under the corrective theology or something, but one of the things that abusive leaders do is they will pull people aside for private conversations to talk about problems in the other person's life. Now, I have private conversations with people all the time. I have been a boss. I have been a leader in different areas, and there are certain conversations that need to happen in private.
Mm-hmm. What
abusive leaders do in private is they will make comments on your personality. And they will tell you that they've just heard things, and they're just trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm getting a twitch. It's bringing up some past.
This thing happens every time I have a conversation with a person or a group about different things on this list. They start going, oh my gosh, yes. Okay. So sometimes I have had private conversations with, say, an employee or a friend or somebody I'm mentoring or whatever, and we will talk about behaviors, specific things that I have seen. So I had an employee one time who never could get to work on time. Never could get to work. He was in charge of answering the phones as soon as the phones came on in the day, but he would get there at 9:30 instead of 9 o'clock. And so we had to have a conversation. Well, I'm not going to have that in a public space.
Right.
But I'm also not going to comment on the personality issues, or, he's living an emergency life. And every time an emergency comes up at 8:45 in the morning, he deals with that instead of considering that it's really pretty important for him to deal with that and add more. That's not my job. My job as an employer, as a supervisor, is to address behavior,
Right.
not personality. But
Right.
abusive leaders will pull people aside and say things like, I've just been hearing things about you talk too much, or you're too effusive, or you're too, whatever it is they don't like. And really it doesn't even matter what it is. The only thing they're trying to do is cover the person they're doing that to with a blanket of fear and suspicion, because there's people out there talking about you.
Right.
But I'm not going to tell you who it is.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we all do that. So we all pull people aside and say, hey, I really want to talk to you about something because I'm really concerned about you. The issue, the difference between that being a healthy thing to do is I do it once in a while, and I truly am seeking the benefit, and I'm focusing on real events and real behaviors and things that I've seen, not things that I've heard. And if I hear things, I'm going to say to that person, you need to go talk to that person. Abusive leaders will use pernicious, anonymous gossip.
I love what you're saying, because I have sat in a seat before where I'll be told, there are people talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, what people?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, well, I really can't say. And right there, the conversation ends. It didn't used to. I used to worry myself sick.
Yeah.
I really did, because that feeling that people are talking in a bad way about me really is destructive.
Right.
To me.
That's the goal.
But now
Leader.
and everybody that I work with knows that. It's like, you know what? If you cannot give me a name, then the conversation just ended right now, because that stirs up so much trouble. You talk about the little flames that can begin in a congregation. There's nothing quite like thinking that 3 or 4 of your very good friends are talking about you in a bad way, but there are no specifics.
Yeah.
Nothing, I just think you need to be aware that, this has come up, but I'm not going to tell you who. So I appreciate, the language that you're using here in this list of traits, because it's really helpful.
Well, I'm looking at a combination of two, and it just like this brings up, I just thought of a specific example, and I think those are important for our listeners, but sabotage is one of the traits.
Oh, yeah.
Combined with gaslighting. That's a separate one, but all of these kind of seem to work in tandem with abusive leaders too. But sabotage. So we say ministries are secretly undone. That word secretly ought to be underlined, bold, italicized, or something. Ministries are secretly undone. Content they can't control is criticized. Relationships are undermined. So there's this, I remember a time that I had made these posters and had them professionally printed. It was all part of a process that our church had adopted together. So, it's not like I went rogue as the minister of the congregation, was like, I'm going to come up with this mission for the church and plaster it all over the walls. This was done in tandem with the entire congregation. And one day I walked in, and these posters, they were gone, and they were huge. They're gone. And I was like, so I start walking around. That's and I'm weird. Looking. Yeah. And I searched the building top to bottom, and it's not that big of a building. You've been in it. I searched high, I searched low, could not find them anywhere. These things were big. They didn't fall down and, just get swept away. And I think there were 6 of them. So practically the whole sanctuary had these posters all over. So I asked the person who I was pretty sure did it. And there was denial. I don't know what you're talking about. And the reason I know he was lying, which really bothered me, was because then I started hearing all these lame things that could have happened to them. Well, maybe the cleaning lady took them. Yeah, the cleaning lady was like, there are these big honking posters that are framed. They were in frames. I'm just gonna take them and put them in the trunk of my car, even though they won't fit. I'll bungee cord the trunk down and ride off with them. Like, so when you start hearing the BS, you start to realize these patterns. But the gaslighting part of that was the denial. Like, if you're going to do it, just admit that you did it. But abusers don't do that.
No. And I think this is a good moment to really define specifically what gaslighting is. Gaslighting has become a very popular term over the past several years. And that's good and bad. It's good because the awareness that gaslighting is real and pervasive in some settings. I'm glad that has happened. At the same time, it's kind of become this umbrella term for all things abusive. Anybody who's I'm being gaslighted. Okay, that's just not accurate. So gaslighting is a specific term. It's a specific form of manipulation specifically intended to make the person being gaslighted doubt their ability to perceive reality. So basically, someone is gaslighting. They are trying to make you feel crazy. That is the only thing. Okay, so it can take the form of many different types of, like you said, the sabotaging, taking down the posters and then just lying to your face about it. So sometimes gaslighting is just blatantly lying. Sometimes gaslighting is, if you've watched the movie, it's a fabulous movie, because this is where this comes from, an old movie called Gaslighting. Sometimes, it's moving objects and somebody says, well, wasn't that over there? And they go, no. And then later they put it back. And go,
I was the victim of that in our home.
Oh my God.
I had John set up to make it look like there were robberies and people entering the home.
Yeah.
And it had me about crazy until I started leaving notes with my 2 daughters who were living with me. It was even things like the shade in the bathroom. We would pull it all the way down because when they showered, that's what they did. Yeah. When we would come home, that was up. There were windows that were pushed out to make it look like someone had entered in the home. The
fern that was intentionally trapped into the screen to make it look like somebody had broken in. And
things. And I'll tell you what, I was going to see a counselor at the time, and I would tell her about that. I found out later that John was reading the notes that I would take to the counselor. So he was 10 steps ahead of me. He was there were moments when I really did think I must have had a nervous breakdown and I went crazy. And I don't know it, but it's a very real thing. It's horrible, very horrible.
Yeah, I had an experience in a marriage therapist office one time. And I'm a trained marriage and family therapist. So I am not dissing that profession by any means. I was in a marriage and family therapist office with my ex-husband. He was not my ex-husband at the time. And he stone cold, straight face said that twice in the past several months prior to that meeting, I had gotten up in his face and screamed at him.
And you hadn't.
Screamed at him. I had no, and he was specific about what I had screamed at him, that it was, when it went, and I had zero recollection. I was, as he continued to talk, and I'm like, I don't remember this. By the end of that session, I was curled up in a fetus position, just sobbing and saying to the therapist, please help me. I must be losing my mind because I don't have any recollection. And the therapist is just sitting there very calmly going, well, what kind of help do you think you need? And I said, I don't know, maybe send me to a hospital, put me in the hospital. What do you need the hospital for? To get some psychiatric testing? I don't know. And I have the training, right? I know if somebody were doing that in my office, I would have approached it very differently, because I would have been, kind of like picking at the sword, trying to get. So he didn't hospitalize me, and what he did do was help me. I had nobody else knew at this point. This was several months into having discovered what was happening in my home, and just the gaslighting was ramping up and up and up. And he said, what do you think will help you? And I said, if there was somebody here that I could talk to, that knew, that I trusted. And he asked for a name. I gave him the name of a couple that went to our church. Anyways, he agreed. And, I just don't like to put his name out there. People know, but I don't want to tear him down.
Right.
It's just, that's not my bandwagon. But anyways, so we go, and I'm to this couple's house. They're older than we are, but they had been good friends. And my response when we first get there is I just fall into her arms, sobbing and telling her these horrible things I had done to my then husband, and couldn't even remember it, and how horrible I felt for having done it to him. And he just sat there, and then he told them the things that he had done that I had discovered, which had brought us into this crisis moment. That he confessed and said that was wrong. I shouldn't have done those things. And so theoretically the story was out, at least with these people, I could be safe. So we, they fed us dinner, we went home. And when I calmed down, I started thinking about it, and I was like, I remember being really angry with him twice that past fall, and having serious conversations with him about my anger, not about what he had done so much, although that was bad enough, but about the position it put me in, all the losses I was experiencing. I had lost the opportunity to teach in the Christian university that we in the town we lived in, because I was teaching Bible classes to women, and I couldn't do it anymore. I had lost all these things that I had lost, huge losses to me, and he lost nothing. And I was angry about that, and I was expressing it, but I never screamed at him. And I know I didn't scream at him because our son was upstairs playing cello the whole time. I would never have done that.
Right.
And I was just like, and I started telling him, I said, I'm trying to understand when the times were that I screamed at you, because I remember these times, but I never screamed at you. And he said, yeah, no, those are the times I was talking about.
Wow.
That was classic gaslighting.
It is. Yeah.
And I played it out in front of his therapist. And then I played it out in front of our friends. And it worked. And he got me to act like an absolutely insane person.
It's awful, isn't it? It really is when that happens to you. It's terrible.
I went back to those friends and told them exactly what happened. And they were like, okay, yeah, we can totally see him doing that. But I never had an opportunity with that therapist.
Yeah.
Anymore. But that is gaslighting. I mean, that's a pretty, I mean, he was gifted at that. Oftentimes it's just, I never said that when they said that.
Isn't it hard? And then we're going to move into another section here. Isn't it hard to think of people being that evil, and that is evil? I can't imagine doing that to someone to the extent at all. That's something I never have done.
Right. And I guarantee if he heard this podcast, he'd deny it up one side.
Right. And I've experienced it from a couple of different people, and it's not fun. But anyway, we have this now. Jimmy's going to provide a link to direct people to this list of traits of abusive leaders. within the church, what do we do with this now? We have this information. Now what happens? How is this of value to us? That's a hard question because it's not a little,
Right.
one-liner there. And I know.
It is a hard question in some ways, partly because the first thing we tend to do with it when we start reading it is going, oh, I do that. Oh, I've done
Mhm.
that. Oh, I did. So the first thing we have to do is go, yeah, okay. We all do these things sometimes. Like we said before,
Mhm.
double speak is the very first one. Speaking in language that deliberately obscures, distorts, or disguises the meaning, speaking in euphemisms. Yes, we all do that sometimes.
Mhm.
Why do we all do that sometimes? Well, sometimes Granny's around. And maybe
Oh, thanks, Christine.
no, but this is the example I use.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Whoops.
I want my grandkids to call me Granny because I'm the kind of granny
Okay.
you are. I mean, it's like it just fits. But I'm talking about the granny who just can't wrap her mind around
Mhm.
some of the things.
Yeah.
That some of the, so we maybe we talk about, for some families, drinking is still really taboo.
Right.
And so maybe we don't talk about going out for drinks later
Right.
in all the specific languages. Maybe we say, okay, yeah, we'll go out. And we just,
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes we use double speak to truly and honestly protect and honor the
Mhm.
people we're around.
Right.
Okay. People who are abusers use double speak to obscure the truth,
Right.
To get what they want.
to get what they
Mhm.
want.
I mean, it's not just to do it for the sake of doing it. There's always an end game, and that's end game are the two words that a good friend of mine and another a good friend of mine and myself talked about somebody who too. You'll probably get the hint. I'm not going to say his name, but a former partner of mine.
Yes. That dude always had end game.
End game is, for us, that was like this light bulb moment. Like, oh my goodness, there was always an end game.
Mhm.
From the first time we shook hands, he had an end game in mind.
First time I met him, I saw his end game.
Yeah, and you did. In fact, you pulled me aside and you were like, "This dude is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Get away from him."
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Abusers have an end game always. It's not like they do these things because they're just, they just double speak or that, they don't have self-awareness and they don't
Like what you
realize they're
said,
lying
too,
when they
to
are.
protect. Sometimes we do that to protect people. It's out of respect often, because I respect Jimmy's values, but my value on a certain issue is a little bit different. It's not straying from what God wants, but maybe personality wise or whatever. So in order to protect him and our relationship, we maybe don't use a certain word, or we use a different word, and we kind of walk around the issue. Teenagers do that all the time. I'm not sure it's an honest protecting of mom, but yeah.
Sometimes we use some of these because we don't want to feel the weight of what we've done. We don't, because I'm screwed up. I make mistakes.
Yeah.
My wonderful, beautiful husband who bought me this porch swing. Sometimes I'm not very nice to him. Sometimes I'm downright mean. And so sometimes on a good day, we'll say, Jeff, I'm so sorry. That was just not nice. Other times I move into a blame shifting space where I'm like, well, okay, but this happened. And well, that's one of the that's near the top of the list.
Right.
For an abusive leader.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is I don't do it all the time. I don't have an end game other than
Right.
self-protection. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Not wanting
Mhm.
to admit my own sin. And I, generally speaking, come back around,
Yeah.
and it's true
Mhm.
of all of us,
Right.
Yeah.
we all do that sometimes. We all have, multiple personas is on here. We all have,
Mhm.
I have my professional persona, and I have my sitting around in my shorts and t-shirt, not planning to go anywhere today persona. What I don't have is a personality that changes.
Yep.
And when we're talking about multiple personas
Mhm.
with abusers, it's a little deeper than just, oh, I'm carefree and happy today, no makeup, and I'm not going anywhere.
Mhm.
Or I might go to Walmart in my shorts and t-shirt because I don't care. I look there. It's for an abuser, it goes deeper to the level of what personality do I need to put on
Mhm.
to get what I want in this particular situation. And I think this leads us into the starting to answer the question you asked, Clara, about what do we do with this? What do we do with information?
Right.
So after we've figured out that I'm not an abuser just because I do some of these things some of the time, we start to begin to see that abusers use these things to create a personality.
Mhm.
And that sounds like a really weird thing to say. So I want to kind of step back and preface it, or put it on a foundation. I want to create a foundation to put it on. Abusive people typically fall into categories of being narcissistic or sociopathic. Those are really,
Mhm.
narcissism has become another one of those words that we throw
Right.
around,
Right.
and kind of think, oh, somebody's really egotistical, therefore they must be a narcissist. Well, that may or may not be true. A lot of people have inflated egos, but they're not narcissists.
Mhm.
A narcissist is a person who really has a disordered personality, and on a continuum, in terms of disordered personalities, you've got narcissist, then sociopath, and psychopath. And if you want to read more about Hare, Hare, has written a wonderful, really foundational book called what is it? Absence of Conscience, Without Conscience, I think is what it's called, about his research with tried and true psychopaths, and talks about the continuum of psychopathy and sociopathy. So you can have, it's like 0 to 40, 0 being no psychopathy, and 40 Ted Bundy, serial killer. Most of us fall somewhere in between there. Women in the normal population who are not psychopaths and sociopaths usually have about a 2.5 rating on, we all have a little bit, which is good
Mhm.
because it keeps it,
Right.
it's a survival necessity. Men in the normal population who are not psychopaths usually are about 4 to 5. When you start getting into, are people abusive in their sociopathy and psychopathy, you're looking at like 8, 9, 10 and above. Okay, so that's the range we're talking about. We're not talking about the rest of us who have
Right.
enough of it to survive. And narcissism is in that continuum as well, but I don't want to go into all of that. So what happens when you get up into those higher numbers, and this is all Robert Hare's scale, and he's done a great job of doing this work and extensive research, is as you go up on the psychopathy scale, you not only do you start adding traits, you start losing traits of healthy, normal personality. One of the key ones that we talk about is empathy.
Mhm.
The ability to think about what another person feels and experiences.
Yep.
the ability to feel with and for another person. You also lose traits like the ability to experience emotion the way a person who's very low on the psychopathy scale. So we, I know you guys well enough. I think you know me well enough to know we're not abusive people.
Right.
So we would be low on that psychopathy scale. We have the ability to experience emotions of love and joy and sadness and hate and fury and disappointment and the whole range of human emotion. We experience it and we feel it. And when you guys are sad and happy, I am sad and happy with you because I have empathy.
Right.
Okay. So what happens as we move up that scale, which means people who have more of these traits, the more traits that people have on this list, the more likely they're going to be higher on that psychopathy scale. The more likely they are sociopathic, narcissistic abusers. They have less of those other traits that form a healthy ego structure. Which means
it's weird as I'm hearing this and totally get it. But when I think of John, and I will use his name, in church leadership, he had full control of the church body.
Yep.
He truly did.
Yep.
He could put the tears on.
Yeah, he knew when to turn it on and turn it off, and was very accurate at faking it.
Sob with people. Yet, when our own son died,
yeah, when I visited him in prison,
nothing.
I've talked about this on the podcast.
Yes.
When I visited him in prison shortly after my oldest brother Mike died, and you knew Mike. Mike died. I think I was in the prison 2 weeks after he died, visiting my dad. Well, he doesn't have to maintain that facade of controlling his own emotions anymore.
That's it.
So
he doesn't have to maintain the facade of faking the emotions.
Right.
And controlling the emotions because he doesn't have them.
No.
Right. So I brought up Mike's death. He didn't even bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, my brother had died, 2 weeks before that?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He wasn't even going to mention it in my visit to him in prison.
Why not? Because there's no end game for him in it.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And that was the biggest.
And when I brought it up, I mean, there was nothing.
Yeah. Well,
there was no emotion.
Sent me a generic card from prison that just said, "I'm so sorry your son died." And I'm thinking, my son, I'll pray for you every day. That was it.
Yeah,
that was it. And
perfect example of what we're talking
it just solidified all the years when I would cry, beg, plead for changes, within our married life. And he would just kind of look at me like, you're really a strange person. I would get that look. And I often would think to myself, he just doesn't feel that the feelings aren't there. Yeah. So I get what you're saying. Now, that being said, often our relationship with church leaders it's a fake relationship. You know what I'm saying? So we're not going to
of artificiality to that.
Yeah.
So your description of what happened with John is a perfect example of what we're talking about when it's an abusive person.
Mm-hmm.
They are on that scale of, and we're not even necessarily talking about somebody that much higher than 10 or, I mean, John was probably closer to 20, given that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Right.
Harming children the way he did as successfully as he did.
Right.
But when we're talking about people around 10, 12, 15 on the scale, what we're talking about is people who have no ego structure of their own. They don't have the things in their personality that create a healthy ego. And by ego, I don't mean, we use the term ego to say, oh, he's egotistical, oh, he just brags. And what I'm talking about is the specific definition of that which makes up a personality. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Right.
how do we use this?
Right.
One of the things that we do with this information of these are the traits of abusers is we learn to understand that ego, or that abusive leaders, abusive people do not target weak and vulnerable people to abuse. The reason we know that is, first of all, think about all the people you know who have been abused.
Mhm.
Look at you guys. You're some of the strongest people I know.
Mhm.
The reason that we think that, and it's been said, and it's common parlance in circles dealing with abuse, is because there's always a vulnerability. There's always a weakness in everybody's life. And so we go, okay, well, obviously, if you got abused, you must have been weak and vulnerable. What else could explain it? And so we look for, there's confirmation bias. We look and we go, oh, it was a single mom. Oh, it was a teenage boy without a dad. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was that. But there's plenty of truth in that myth, but there's also a vast amount of information that belies that truth. So let's start looking at the contradictory information. I love to talk about Bill and Hillary Clinton. Bill Clinton is
Whoa.
the best sociopath, and he's married to one of the strongest women in American history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
She lays the blame for what happened to Monica Lewinsky at Monica's feet. Mm-hmm. And yet she would probably never do that in any other situation.
Right.
Because he's got her so wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so, when I met my ex-husband, I was a very successful undergraduate student. I had plans to go on to graduate school. I was already I was a junior in college. I was applying to graduate schools. I was on my own. I mean, I didn't have any family support. Mm-hmm. I was very strong. I knew what I wanted. I knew where I was going. I knew what I had to do. And I was extremely smart. I'll just say it. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. And he was going to the mission field, already raised all his money, the darling of the churches in the Northwest, and he swept me off my feet, and everybody was thrilled for us. Mm-hmm. So how do we make sense of strong, intelligent people being, and there's thousands of stories like this. How do we make sense of somebody like John being able to do what he did in entire communities, right, where there's, yes, vulnerabilities, but also very, at the same time, strong, intelligent, wise, and nobody sees it? And here's the answer. Because abusers have no ego structure of their own. So they go out and they find people who can give them the ego, pardon the sirens.
They're coming for you.
Right?
They finally figured you out.
All right. They go out and they look for people who will give them the ego structure they lack. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if somebody wants to appear strong and intelligent and bold, and they don't have that in their own ego structure, what are they going to look for? They're going to find a victim who is strong and powerful and intelligent and bold. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this plays out in the research. You go back and you read Hare's book, Without Conscience, it plays out in the research. Predators will watch their targets for a long time before they move.
Yes.
They watch and they look and they see, okay, do they have what I want? How do I get them? How do I? So by the time somebody approaches a target and they already know what they like to drink, where they hang out, and so they just bedazzle the target with all this information and sweep them off their feet.
Yeah.
And they do it community wide as well as individually. So that's the briefest way I can explain that. What do we do with these this list?
So we now identify someone, and I guess we can kind of close on this note. We identify someone who is an abuser. What's the next step?
Well, I think it's important again, and Christine, I agree wholeheartedly. I look at, I talk about this all the time. When I talk about vulnerabilities, I tell people we all have vulnerabilities. Stop thinking in terms of poverty, of single parenthood, of on and on and on. The things that we define as vulnerable, that is not what vulnerability is per se. Vulnerability is it's a crack in the wall anywhere within us, and an abuser will find that crack and they will jump through that crack.
Right.
And they will chip away at it and chip away at it. And hear my own dad, like the way he described his victims, he intentionally found people who were strong, even little children, abuse in plain sight.
On that chase too. It's
Yeah.
for them to find that. And
Yeah.
let me say too that so often I hear, especially therapists say, well, if you want to avoid being abused again, you got to get rid of your vulnerabilities. And my response to that is absolutely not.
Yeah.
Because if you have no vulnerabilities, then you can't not have a healthy relationship in the future.
Yeah.
Because being vulnerable to another person and having them vulnerable to you, and then taking care and being gentle and loving in those vulnerabilities is part of a good relationship.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
With this list of traits, as we go, oh, wait a second, I don't have to not be vulnerable. I get to have the power to see an abuser. And this is what comes up with so many survivors I talk about. This isn't about, I get asked all the time, Christine, am I ever going to be able to trust another man or woman again? And my response is, it used to be, well, I hope so. I hope I will be. And then as I learned through my process, I didn't have to learn to trust other people. I had to learn to see them, but I had learned to see them. I had 20 plus years of experience of seeing hidden abuse. What I had to learn to do was trust myself, trust my own ability to see. If I can see an abuser, you know what else I can see? A non-abuser.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If I can trust that I can, my gut screams at me even before I start seeing the specific traits of an abuser.
That's just what I was going to ask the two of you.
Yeah.
The initial thing I think that all of us have is that litmus test of that gut feeling. That horrible gut feeling. We might not be able to put a label on it just yet, but I think this list will help us with that.
And
but that gut feeling is real.
Yes. And one of the best, so there's two books. Gavin DeBecker wrote
The Gift of Fear.
Gift of Fear.
Yep.
Beautiful, beautiful book about our intuition and trusting. Another woman, I can't remember her name, wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. The best corollary to The Gift of Fear, which describes your intuition. Best correlation to that corollary to that is obey your intuition.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's good.
I
Yeah.
trusted my gut for decades, but I have not always obeyed my gut.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That was like the capstone. That did it for me. So, and we have those intuitions. The hair stands on end, all that stuff, the gut wrenches when there are bad people in our midst. But you know what? We also know I feel good people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel those good people.
Yeah.
And so the key for us is not to learn to trust other people. The key for us is to learn to trust our own and obey our own intuition, our gut feeling.
Yeah.
And this list of traits of abusers can help us do that. Can remind us we know how to see abusers. And for people who've never been abused, it can teach them how to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I would end on this note. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the benefit of this is not to say, oh, well, here's a checklist. I can go down through and bop, because it doesn't work that way. Like, it just doesn't. You're exactly right. You have to listen to your intuition and you have to use information. Mm-hmm. And then you have to practice using your intuition. So, and you have to be objective. So it's a combination of all these things. Because you can't just say, well, I have a gut feeling. I know that person's an abuser and, tackle them to the ground. I warn churches not to do that when I do trainings. I'm like, please don't do that. But one of the exercises that I do almost every place I go is I'll ask some of the key leaders, do you have any people within this congregation, anywhere, leadership or otherwise, with whom you have concerns that they might have abusive characteristics? Just yes or no. And if they say yes, I'll say, great. Do not tell me who that person is. I'm going to find them.
Yeah.
And you tell me if I'm right. And it is incredibly, incredibly accurate to the point where people come back and they're just like, how do you do that? Because and I wrote about that in my book, example, a mutual friend of ours. I showed up at the congregation and he told me, he said, we have a really problematic person that he said, he just makes every hair on my body stand up when he's around kids. I think he's incredibly unsafe. I'm not going to tell you who he is. And that was the first time where I was like, "Ooh, I like this game." And I mean, within seconds, I said, "That's the guy."
Yeah.
And his response was, "How do you do that?" It works, and you're right. You have to trust in yourself, trust your intuition, but be objective too. Mm-hmm. Be as objective as possible, and they will stand out, but so will the good people. And I think that's a great point. So with that said, Christine, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And to our listeners, we're so thankful that you tuned into this episode. We hope you found it as helpful as we did. Yes. And we will catch you next round.
Great.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. And check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.